The wind was hot and dry that summer day in Texas. The streets of Round Rock were quiet, almost too quiet, when a young man rode in on a tired horse. His name was Sam Bass, a name that carried whispers of danger across the state. He was only 27 years old, but already a legend. To most people, he was an outlaw, a train robber, a thief, a criminal. But to others, Sam Bass was something more. He was a man who refused to bow down to life's unfairness, a man who chose to carve his own path, no matter how short it might be. And on that day, July 19th, 1878, his path was about to reach its end. Before his death, Sam Bass had become a story, one that spread faster than the wind through the towns of the Old West. People told tales of a charming young man who laughed in the face of danger, who robbed trains without killing anyone, and who smiled even when the law came for him. But to understand how that man came to be, we must go back to where it all began. Sam Bass was born in 1851 in a small Indiana town called Mitchell. His parents, Daniel and Elizabeth Bass, were simple, hard-working people. Life in Indiana was quiet, filled with church bells, long fields, and wooden houses. But when Sam was still a boy, tragedy struck. His parents both died, leaving him an orphan. He was taken in by an uncle who tried to raise him right. But Sam was restless. He didn't fit into the calm rhythm of small-town life. There was something wild inside him, a need to move, to explore, to find something more. By his late teens, he was ready to leave it all behind. With only a few dollars in his pocket and dreams as big as the open sky, Sam headed west. Like many young men of his time, he believed the West was a place where anyone could make their fortune, if they were brave enough. In Texas, Sam found work as a cowboy and a farmhand. The work was tough. The pay was small, but Sam had a gift that set him apart. He was good with horses, quick with his hands, and even quicker with his smile. He soon became known as a friendly young man who could make anyone laugh. But there was another side to him. When night fell and the ranch work was done, Sam often sat down at the poker tables in dusty saloons. He was a natural gambler. The cards fascinated him. He didn't gamble for money, not really. He gambled for the thrill. He was chasing luck, chasing that feeling of being in control of something in a world that had taken so much from him. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost, but he never gave up. Life on the frontier was full of choices, some easy, some deadly. For Sam Bass, the line between right and wrong started to blur. He wasn't a violent man, but he was drawn to danger, to the edge of things. In the mid-1870s, he met a man named Joel Collins. Collins was older, clever, and already known to the law. He liked Sam's charm and saw in him the spark of adventure. Together they started small, stealing cattle, smuggling horses, running shady deals. But small crimes soon weren't enough. The two men wanted something bigger, something that would make them legends. By 1877, Sam Bass had grown tired of working for others. He wanted freedom. He wanted money. And Joel Collins had a plan so daring it sounded like something out of a dime novel. They would rob a train, not just any train, a Union Pacific train carrying freshly minted gold coins from the U.S. Treasury. It was a dangerous idea, but the thought of all that gold was too tempting to ignore. That fall, Sam and Joel gathered a small gang and rode north toward Big Springs, Nebraska. The ride was long and rough, but they were determined. Each man knew that one wrong move could mean death, but greed and hope kept them going. On the night of September 18th, 1877, as the moon hung low over the plains, the gang stopped the train. They moved quickly, forcing the conductor to open the safe. Inside, they found $60,000 in new gold coins, one of the largest train robberies in American history. Sam Bass had done it. He had gone from an orphaned farm boy to one of the richest outlaws in the country, overnight. But gold is a dangerous friend. It shines bright, but it also blinds. The next morning, newspapers across the country screamed his name. The Big Springs robbery. Daring bandits strike again! Sam Bass, the gentleman outlaw. For the first time, Sam Bass was famous. But fame in the Wild West came with a price, and that price was blood. The gang split the money and fled. Some went east, others south. Lawmen were already on their trail. Within weeks, most of the men were caught or killed. Only Sam Bass managed to escape. He rode south, back into Texas, carrying his share of gold and a new name that everyone knew. But deep down, Sam must have known that the road ahead would not be easy. The West loved legends, but it never let them live long. And as he disappeared into the Texas horizon, the story of Sam Bass, the man who laughed at the law, was only just beginning. When the news of the Big Springs train robbery spread, the name Sam Bass was on everyone's lips. Some called him a thief, others called him a hero. But no matter what they thought, one thing was clear. Sam Bass had done the impossible. He had outsmarted the Union Pacific, taken $60,000 in gold, and vanished into thin air. For a moment he was untouchable. But in the West, glory never lasted long. After the robbery, Sam and his partner Joel Collins split the gold with the rest of the gang. Each man rode off in a different direction, hoping to lose the law. Sam rode south toward Texas, where the open plains and friendly towns offered shelter. He had dreams of starting fresh, maybe even settling down. But fate had other plans. The law was everywhere. The Pinkerton detectives, local sheriffs, and even the U.S. Army were hunting the robbers. They wanted the gold back and they wanted blood. Within weeks, several of the robbers were dead. Joel Collins himself was caught and shot in a gunfight. When Sam heard that his old friend had been killed, he didn't speak for a long time. He just stared into the fire, silent, his face half lit by the flames. He had money now, but it felt heavy, like a curse. For a while, he tried to live quietly. He stayed in Denton County, Texas, under a false name. He gambled, drank, and smiled his easy smile. But people in Texas talked too much. The legend of Sam Bass had already grown beyond his control. Stories of the gentleman bandit spread from saloons to stagecoaches. Every time a robbery happened anywhere in Texas, people whispered his name. It didn't matter if he was innocent. The legend had already chosen him. Sam's money from the train robbery ran out faster than he expected. He gambled most of it away and spent the rest trying to hide. Soon, he was broke again and restless. One evening in late 1877, Sam sat at a small table in a Denton saloon, shuffling cards. A man across from him said, "Bass, you had your gold once. Why don't you ride for it again?" Sam looked up, smiled that same half grin that made him famous, and said, "Maybe I will." That was the moment the Bass gang was born. Over the next few months, Sam gathered a small group of men who believed in his charm and luck. There was Seaborn Barnes, a tall, quiet man who followed Sam like a shadow. Frank Jackson, young and loyal. Henry Underwood, reckless but brave. And Jim Murphy, a man with secrets of his own. Together, they rode under the blazing Texas sun looking for their next big score. In early 1878, the Bass gang began robbing stagecoaches and small trains across North Texas. They struck fast, never staying in one place too long. Sam always made sure no one was killed if it could be avoided. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He just wanted the thrill, the gold, and the freedom. To some, that made him worse than a murderer. To others, it made him a hero. The newspapers loved him. They called him the Texas Robin Hood, even though Sam never gave his money away. Still, people admired his boldness, the way he rode right into danger and rode out smiling. The Texas Rangers, however, were not impressed. By the spring of 1878, the governor himself had ordered Major John B. Jones of the Rangers to bring Bass down, dead or alive. Jones formed a special unit called the Frontier Battalion, and they began tracking Sam's every move. But Bass always seemed to be one step ahead. One story tells that after a train robbery near Mesquite, Sam and his men were chased for 2 days straight. The Rangers thought they had them trapped in a canyon. When they rushed in, they found only a burned-out campfire, an empty whiskey bottle, and a note pinned to a tree. The note read, "You boys ride fast, but we ride smarter. S.B." Whether that story was true or not, it only added to his fame. Sam Bass became more than a man. He became a symbol of defiance. But deep inside, the smile was fading. The pressure was closing in. He was being hunted by the best lawmen in Texas, and every robbery brought them closer. Some nights around the campfire, Seaborn Barnes would ask, "Sam, what'll we do when they finally catch up?" Sam would grin and say, "They'll have to catch me first." It was bravado, but also denial. He knew his luck couldn't last forever. By summer, the gang was planning something big, something that would either make them rich again or get them all killed. Sam wanted one last score, a final ride that would set him free from the chase. They had their eyes on a bank in Round Rock, Texas. It was a small town, but the bank held plenty of cash. The plan was simple. Ride in fast, grab the money, and ride out before the Rangers could react. But what Sam didn't know was that one of his own men, Jim Murphy, was already talking to the Rangers. He had betrayed them. As the gang prepared for the Round Rock job, the Rangers were preparing too. They knew every move Bass was about to make. The cards had been dealt. The gambler's luck was running out, and soon the man with the famous smile would face his final hand. By the summer of 1878, the heat in Texas was thick, and so was the tension. The Bass gang had been running wild for months, robbing trains, dodging Rangers, and living on the edge of the law. But even outlaws grow tired. Sam Bass sat by the campfire one night, staring into the flames. His once bright eyes looked darker now, his grin more like a mask. He had gold dust in his pockets and wanted posters with his face on every wall from Dallas to Austin. The chase had taken its toll. He was tired of hiding, tired of running, and tired of wondering who he could trust. Around him the gang rested. Seaborn Barnes was cleaning his rifle, quiet as always. Frank Jackson, the youngest of them, was asleep beside his horse, and a few feet away, Jim Murphy sat apart from the others, staring into the distance. Murphy had a lot on his mind, because Jim Murphy was no longer just an outlaw. He was a traitor. A few weeks earlier, Murphy had been captured by the Rangers. They promised him a deal, help them catch Sam Bass, and he'd walk free. It was a choice between prison or betrayal. He chose betrayal. Since then, Murphy had been living two lives, riding with the gang by day and secretly passing information to the Texas Rangers by night. Every move Sam made, every plan he discussed, the Rangers already knew, and now they knew about Round Rock. The idea to rob the Round Rock bank came from Sam himself. The gang was broke again, and Sam believed this would be their last big job before disappearing for good. The plan was simple. Ride into town, grab the cash, and vanish into the hills. To Sam, it was a way out. To Murphy, it was a trap. He sent word to the Rangers. Bass is coming. Round Rock, July 19th. Major John B. Jones, leader of the Frontier Battalion, gathered his men. They rode hard to Round Rock, determined to end the outlaw's story once and for all. Meanwhile, Sam and his men were unaware of the danger waiting ahead. They traveled light and kept to the back roads, moving under the cover of darkness. On the evening of July 18th, 1878, the gang made camp a few miles outside Round Rock. The air was still, and the stars burned bright above them. As they sat around the fire, Seaborn Barnes leaned over and said quietly, "Sam, you sure about this job?" "Feels different." Sam looked at him and smiled, the same smile that had carried him through every scrape and chase. "We've come too far to turn back now, Barnes. Just one more ride, then we're free." His voice was calm, confident, but deep down, maybe even Sam knew this ride would not end the way he hoped. At dawn, they packed up and rode toward Round Rock. The small town was quiet, with only a few people out on the streets. The gang stopped just outside, tying their horses behind a line of trees. Sam wanted to walk in first, just to look things over. It was a decision that would seal his fate. What Sam didn't know was that Ranger Sergeant Richard Ware, Deputy Sheriff Grimes, and other lawmen were already in the area, waiting. Murphy's information had been perfect. As Sam and Seaborn walked toward a small general store, Grimes recognized them. He reached for his gun, calling out, "Boys, are you armed?" Sam froze. Barnes turned. Then, a flash of steel, a loud crack, and smoke filled the air. The gunfight that followed was fast and brutal. Bullets tore through windows. Horses screamed. People ran for cover. Within seconds, Deputy Grimes lay dead and Seaborn Barnes fell beside him, shot through the chest. Sam fired back, hitting one Ranger and ducking behind a wagon. His revolver clicked empty. Blood was running down his side. He'd been hit. He stumbled toward the alley, clutching his wound, while Frank Jackson grabbed the horses. "Come on, Sam! We gotta go!" he shouted, but Sam's strength was fading. Each step was slower than the last. The two men rode hard out of town. Behind them, gunfire echoed through the streets of Round Rock. Sam Bass slumped forward on his saddle, his hands slick with blood. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He just whispered, "Guess my luck's run out, Frank." They stopped about a mile outside town near a clump of trees. Sam slid from his horse and fell to the ground. He was bleeding badly, the wound deep. Frank knelt beside him, tears in his eyes. "I'll get help, Sam. You hang on." But Sam shook his head weakly. "No, boy. It's over. You ride? Don't let them catch you." Frank didn't want to leave, but he knew he had no choice. He mounted his horse and disappeared into the brush. Sam Bass lay there alone, the morning sun creeping over the horizon. A few hours later, the Rangers found him. He was pale, weak, and barely breathing. They carried him into town and placed him in a small cabin near the jail. For 2 days, he lingered between life and death. He spoke softly, thanking those who helped him, refusing to name his friends. When asked why he did it all, he simply said, "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to live free." On July 21st, 1878, his 27th birthday, Sam Bass took his final breath, and just before he died, a faint smile crossed his lips. The morning sun of July 21st, 1878, crept slowly over the horizon, spreading light across the quiet town of Round Rock, Texas. Inside a small wooden cabin near the jailhouse, a young man lay dying. His name was Sam Bass, once the most wanted outlaw in Texas. Now just another broken body on a hard bed. His skin was pale, his breathing slow and shallow. The bullet that tore through his body 2 days earlier had done its work. Even the town doctor knew there was nothing left to do. The Rangers stood outside the cabin, hats in hand. They had finally caught their man, but victory didn't feel like triumph. Inside, Major John B. Jones, commander of the Texas Rangers Frontier Battalion, sat by the bed. He looked at the outlaw who had outsmarted his men for months. Sam Bass didn't look like the monster the newspapers had described. He looked more like a kid who had wandered too far into trouble. Jones spoke softly. "Sam, it's near over now. You got any last words?" Bass opened his eyes, faint but calm. He managed a weak grin. "Not much to say, Major. I'm done for." For 2 days, Sam Bass drifted between life and death. Sometimes he spoke in whispers. Sometimes he was silent for hours. He asked about Seaborn Barnes, his loyal friend who had died in the shootout. When they told him Barnes was gone, Sam only nodded. "He was a good man," he murmured. "A good man. Even in his pain, he refused to betray his gang." When asked for names or hiding places, he simply said, "I wouldn't give them up when I lived. I sure won't now." Those were the words of a man who, even at the edge of death, kept his code. Outside the cabin, people gathered. Word had spread across Round Rock. The famous outlaw Sam Bass was dying. Men who once feared him now came quietly to see him. Women whispered prayers. Some brought water, others food, though he could barely swallow. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the man who had lived faster than the law and was now paying the price. That evening, the sky turned red and gold as the sun began to set. Inside, the room grew quiet. Sam's breathing slowed. The doctor leaned close, but Sam's eyes were far away now, somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the dust, beyond the fear. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, Sam Bass took a slow breath, then another. He exhaled one final time. He was gone. It was his 27th birthday. They buried him the next day in the Round Rock Cemetery, not far from where he fell. His grave was marked by a simple headstone that read, "Sam Bass, born July 21st, 1851, died July 21st, 1878. A brave man reposes in death here." It wasn't written by a lawman. It was written by the townspeople, people who had come to see Sam not just as an outlaw, but as something more. In the days that followed, stories spread faster than wildfire. Some said he died smiling. Others swore he asked for forgiveness. Each version made him larger than life. A few months later, a traveling musician wrote a song, a ballad about the young outlaw who robbed trains and laughed at danger. It was called The Ballad of Sam Bass. The song painted him as a hero, a daring rider who took from the rich and fought the law. Soon, cowboys were singing it on the trail, saloon players were strumming it on guitars, and children were humming it in the streets. Sam Bass, the man, was dead. But Sam Bass, the legend, had just been born. In truth, Sam wasn't a Robin Hood. He never gave money to the poor, never fought for justice. He was simply a man chasing freedom, and in that chase, he became the very symbol of it. People loved him because he represented something they all longed for: the courage to live by your own rules, even when the world stood against you. The newspapers that once called him a criminal now called him the last outlaw of Texas. His name became a part of Western folklore, standing alongside Jesse James and Billy the Kid. Years passed, but his story refused to fade. Every town he ever passed through had its own version of what happened. Some said he was kind, others said he was reckless. But everyone agreed on one thing: Sam Bass had style. He robbed without cruelty. He rode without fear. And he died without begging for mercy. In the rough, lawless world of the 1800s that made him unforgettable. Today, more than a century later, the town of Round Rock still remembers him. Every year, people visit his grave, leaving coins, cards, and even bottles of whiskey as tribute. Some come for history, others come for the mystery, but deep down, they all come for the same reason: to touch a piece of the legend that refuses to die. Because in every story and every song, Sam Bass still rides. Through the dust of Texas, through the echoes of gunfire and galloping hooves, through the heart of every dreamer who's ever wanted to live free, his spirit endures. The outlaw who smiled at death became something more powerful than any bullet could kill. He became a symbol. He became a story. He became Sam Bass, the man who lived fast, died young, and never apologized for chasing freedom. When Sam Bass took his last breath on that hot July afternoon in 1878, Texas went quiet for a moment. The lawmen had done their job. The outlaw was dead, the gang was scattered, and the gold was long gone. But death didn't end Sam Bass's story. In fact, it only made it stronger. News of his death spread across the frontier like wildfire. From Dallas to Denver, from dusty saloons to smoky campsites, people whispered about the young outlaw who smiled as he died. The newspapers printed every detail, some true, most exaggerated. One called him the Robin Hood of Texas. Another wrote, "Bass robbed the rich but spared the poor." None of it was fully accurate, but in a land hungry for heroes, truth didn't matter. Stories did. In the months that followed, songs began to appear, songs written by cowboys, trail riders, and campfire poets who had never met Sam Bass but felt they knew him. The most famous of them all was the Ballad of Sam Bass. No one knew exactly who wrote it first. Some said it came from a cowboy near Denton County. Others claimed it started on a cattle drive across the plains. But wherever it came from, it spread faster than any headline could. The ballad told of a fearless man who laughed at danger, robbed the mighty railroads, and faced his end like a hero. Its simple words carried an emotional punch that made it unforgettable. Sam Bass was born in Indiana. It was his native home, and at the age of 17, young Sam began to roam. Each verse painted a picture of rebellion and tragedy. The young man who turned from a hard-working cowboy to a hunted outlaw, dying not with regret but with pride. Cowboys sang it under the stars, their voices echoing across the plains. It became more than a song. It became a story passed from one generation to another. For the working men of the West, cowhands, miners, and drifters, Sam Bass wasn't just an outlaw. He was one of them. He had fought against a system that seemed built for the rich and powerful. And even though he lost, he did it on his own terms. In a time when life was hard and justice uneven, people found comfort in his legend. To them, Sam Bass represented freedom, the kind of wild, reckless freedom that most could only dream about. As the years rolled on, his story took on a life of its own. Historians tried to separate truth from fiction, but the two had already tangled together like desert vines. Some said Sam was kind, giving coins to poor farmers after his robberies. Others said he never hurt anyone who didn't threaten him first. No one could prove those tales, but no one wanted to either. The legend was too good to ruin. By the turn of the century, Sam Bass had become a fixture of American folklore. Writers began including him in dime novels, cheap little paperbacks filled with tales of gunfights and outlaws. In those stories, Sam was larger than life, faster with a gun, smoother with a smile, always one step ahead of the Rangers. Readers couldn't get enough. They didn't care if it was real. They cared that it felt real, that it stirred something inside them. In Round Rock, the very town where he fell, the people kept his memory alive. Some hated the attention, others embraced it. His grave became a quiet landmark, visited by travelers who had grown up singing about him. Over time, people began to leave little tokens, coins, notes, flowers, even whiskey bottles, on his grave. Not to honor the crimes, but the courage. Not to celebrate the outlaw, but the man who lived and died without ever pretending to be someone else. By the early 1900s, the Ballad of Sam Bass had made its way into school books, stage shows, and even early radio broadcasts. It became one of the most famous folk songs of the Old West, sung alongside Jesse James and the Streets of Laredo. In every verse, Sam Bass became more heroic, more human, more mythical, and somehow more alive. But the truth behind the legend was quieter and sadder. Sam Bass had never been rich. He never fought for the poor or stood for a cause. He was just a young man who wanted freedom, who made one wrong choice and never found a way back. Yet maybe that's why people loved him. He wasn't perfect. He was human. Flawed, daring, restless, and doomed. His life was a reflection of the American dream turned upside down. The dream to rise above your fate, even if it kills you trying. More than 100 years later, Sam Bass's story still echoes through Texas. Round Rock hosts annual festivals celebrating its Wild West past. Historians debate the facts, musicians record new versions of the old ballad, and tourists still kneel by his grave, reading the simple words carved in stone. A brave man reposes in death here, and maybe that's the truest line ever written about Sam Bass. Because brave men aren't always heroes. Sometimes they're just dreamers, too wild for their time, too stubborn to surrender, and too full of life to die quietly. Sam Bass was one of them. He may have lost the game, but he never folded his hand. He lived fast, died young, and became eternal through a song, a story, and a legend that refuses to fade. Decades after Sam Bass fell in Round Rock, his name was still being spoken, not in fear, but in argument. To some, he was a cold-blooded outlaw, a thief who broke the law and paid the price. To others, he was a folk hero, a symbol of courage, freedom, and rebellion against the powers that ruled the frontier. Even in death, Sam Bass refused to rest quietly. His story kept stirring hearts and dividing them. In small towns across Texas, people gathered in saloons and front porches, retelling the story the way they saw it. Old men who remembered the 1870s would lean back in their chairs and say, "Sam wasn't all bad. He never hurt nobody who didn't draw first." But the lawmen and the families of those caught in his gunfire saw it differently. To them, he was a criminal who chose the wrong road and dragged others down with him. The truth, as always, sat somewhere in the middle. When people talked about Sam Bass, they weren't really talking about crime. They were talking about freedom, the kind that could not be bought, sold, or tamed. Sam's story came at a time when the West itself was changing. The open frontier was closing. The railroad stretched across the land. Big companies and banks were replacing the old ways of life. To ordinary folks, farmers, ranchers, cowboys, the new world felt cold and controlled. And then came the stories of men like Sam Bass, men who stood against that system, men who refused to kneel. He didn't have a cause or a political message. But his defiance spoke louder than words. The Ballad of Sam Bass only added fuel to the fire. It painted him as brave, daring, and unbroken. The verses made him seem like a man standing tall against injustice, even if that wasn't entirely true. But folk songs have a power that facts never do. They turn people into symbols, and symbols into something almost holy. Soon, Sam Bass wasn't just an outlaw anymore. He was an idea, the idea of freedom at any cost. Still, not everyone agreed. In the early 1900s, historians began digging into the real records. The police reports, the witness statements, the wanted posters. They painted a very different picture. One report described Bass as a habitual gambler and thief. Another called him reckless, untrustworthy, and vain. To these writers, Sam Bass was no hero. He was simply a young man with charm and bad judgment. But for every historian trying to expose the truth, there was a storyteller ready to keep the legend alive. Movies, radio shows, and pulp magazines soon joined the debate. In one story, Sam Bass was a noble outlaw who gave away stolen money to poor families. In another, he was a dangerous bandit, quick to shoot and slow to trust. Each version said more about the storyteller than about Sam himself. To those who admired independence, Sam was a hero. To those who believed in law and order, he was a warning. In Round Rock, where he died, the division was most visible. The town tried to honor its history without glorifying its outlaw. Some locals wanted his grave removed, fearing it drew the wrong kind of attention. Others argued it was a part of their past, a symbol of the Old West they couldn't erase. In the end, the grave stayed. Visitors came from all over the country, not to celebrate crime, but to touch a piece of history that still felt alive. Generations passed. By the mid-20th century, the real Sam Bass had become a shadow beneath his own legend. Hollywood gave him new faces, handsome actors, quick with a gun and quicker with a smile. The truth faded behind the glare of movie lights and the rhythm of country songs. In the stories that reached the big screen, Sam was no longer a desperate gambler. He was a charming cowboy, a misunderstood dreamer, and maybe in some ways that version wasn't too far from the truth. Because at his core, Sam Bass was not evil. He was restless, wild, and flawed. A man trying to make sense of a world that kept closing in around him. He never killed for pleasure. He never ruled with fear. He just refused to live small, refused to live quietly, and that's what people loved about him. The courage to live loudly, even if it led him straight into the storm. Over time, historians began to admit something they once resisted. Maybe Sam Bass wasn't a hero. But he wasn't the villain either. He was simply a man, caught between dreams and desperation, between right and wrong, between freedom and fate. And that's what made him unforgettable, even today. Over a century later, the debate continues. Was he a criminal or a cowboy? A sinner or a symbol? Maybe both. Because that's the beauty of a legend. It becomes what people need it to be. To the fearful, Sam Bass was a warning. To the hopeful, he was proof that one person could stand against the odds. To the dreamers, he was everything the world had taken away. Courage, charm, and freedom. And that's why the story of Sam Bass still rides through time, not as a man chained to his crimes, but as a spirit that refused to die. Long before Sam Bass became a legend, the Texas Rangers were already a name to be feared and respected. They were the thin line between chaos and law, men who lived by the gun, the saddle, and the badge. But when Sam Bass rode into history, something changed. For the first time, the Rangers met a man who could outthink them, outride them, and sometimes even outsmart them. Their pursuit of Sam Bass would test their skills, their patience, and their pride, and would go on to define both their legacy and his. When the Big Springs train robbery made headlines in 1877, the Rangers took notice. But it wasn't until Bass returned to Texas, robbing stagecoaches and trains across the plains, that the real hunt began. Governor Richard B. Hubbard gave a direct order. Find Bass. Stop him. Dead or alive. To lead the mission, he chose Major John B. Jones, commander of the newly formed Frontier Battalion, a tough, no-nonsense officer known for his discipline and quiet intelligence. Jones accepted without hesitation. He saw Bass not just as a criminal, but as a challenge, a man whose capture could prove the Rangers' strength to the whole state. For months, the Frontier Battalion chased rumors and whispers. They rode through dust storms and heat waves, across creeks and canyons, following faint tracks that always seemed to vanish. Bass and his gang, Seaborn Barnes, Frank Jackson, Jim Murphy, and a few others, were ghosts in the brush. They never stayed long in one town. They slept under the stars, moved at night, and disappeared before dawn. Every time the Rangers thought they had them trapped, Bass slipped away, like smoke through their fingers. The people of Texas watched the chase with fascination. In every saloon, men argued about who would win, the law or the outlaw. And the newspapers printed every rumor, turning the pursuit into a public drama. One article called Bass the Fox of Texas. Another described Jones as the hound that will not quit the trail. For a while, it seemed like the two men were bound by fate, each needing the other to complete the story. What made Bass so hard to catch wasn't just his skill with a horse or his quick draw. It was his understanding of people. He could read a crowd, sense danger, and blend in where no one expected him. In towns like Denton and Weatherford, he was known to sit in taverns, talking to the locals as if he were just another ranch hand. Sometimes he even joined the search parties that were looking for him, laughing quietly as the Rangers rode by. He didn't have an army or a fortress. All he had was charm, instinct, and luck, and for a time, that was enough. But the Rangers were learning too. Major Jones began studying Bass's habits, his roots, even his personality. He realized that Sam was not reckless, he was strategic. Jones stopped chasing every rumor and started thinking like Bass himself. He placed scouts in likely towns, bribed informants, and set traps in silence. And then, in early 1878, he found his break. A frightened member of the Bass gang, Jim Murphy, had been captured. Jones saw his weakness and used it. He offered him a deal, freedom for betrayal. Murphy hesitated, then agreed. From that moment, the chase was no longer a hunt. It was an ambush waiting to happen. As Murphy secretly fed information to Jones, the Rangers grew closer to their target. They learned of Bass's next big plan, the Round Rock bank robbery, and moved to intercept. Jones handpicked the Rangers for the job. He didn't want fame or credit. He wanted results. "We'll stop him in Round Rock," he told his men. "We'll end it there." And so they did. But not without cost. The shootout at Round Rock on July 19, 1878 was short but fierce. Deputy Grimes fell first, then Seaborn Barnes. Sam Bass, hid in the back, managed to escape for a few hours, before the Rangers found him dying under a tree. When Major Jones was told Bass had been captured alive, he rode out to see for himself. He stood over the wounded outlaw and said quietly, "You gave us a hard run, Sam." Bass smiled faintly. "I tried, Major." "Guess you win." It wasn't said with anger or regret, just a tired acceptance. Two men on opposite sides of the law, sharing a rare moment of respect. After Sam's death, Major Jones and the Rangers were celebrated across Texas. The newspapers praised them as heroes who had restored law and order. Songs were written about both men. One the outlaw who lived free, the other the lawman who never gave up. Ironically, the chase that was meant to destroy Sam's legend only made it grow. By defeating him, the Rangers helped turn him into a symbol. He became part of their story, and they became part of his. For the Texas Rangers, the Sam Bass pursuit marked a turning point. It proved their strength and solidified their reputation as the guardians of Texas law. But it also reminded them that even the bravest outlaw could inspire as much admiration as fear. In the years that followed, young Rangers were taught the story not just as a lesson in justice, but as a warning. Never underestimate the power of a man with nothing to lose. And though the Rangers won the chase, they never quite escaped the shadow of the man they hunted. Because legends, whether outlaw or lawman, live forever in the dust of Texas, and somewhere between them, riding the line between justice and rebellion, the spirit of Sam Bass still rides. When the gun smoke cleared from the dusty streets of Round Rock, Texas in 1878, the story of Sam Bass should have ended there, buried beneath the oak trees of a small-town cemetery. But it didn't. It was just beginning, because legends, real legends, don't die with their bodies. They live on in stories, songs, and screens, reshaped by every generation that retells them. And few legends of the American West have traveled as far, or lasted as long as the story of Sam Bass. It started with a song, a simple, haunting tune sung by cowboys on the trail. The Ballad of Sam Bass spread across the West like a whisper carried on the wind. No one knew who wrote it first. Some said a cowboy in Denton County, others claimed an old trailhand near Abilene. But what mattered wasn't who wrote it. What mattered was how it made people feel. It told of a poor farm boy turned rebel, of gold, betrayal, and a death too young. It gave him heart. It gave him purpose. It gave him immortality. Sam Bass was born in Indiana. It was his native home. At the age of 17, young Sam began to roam. The verses spread from ranch to ranch, campfire to campfire. By the turn of the century, the ballad had become one of the most famous songs of the Old West. As the years passed, storytellers, writers, and showmen picked up where the song left off. By the early 1900s, America was changing fast. The frontier was gone. Trains now carried passengers instead of gold. And the wild days of cowboys and outlaws were fading into memory. But people didn't want to forget. They longed for the rough, untamed spirit of the past. And so, they turned to the stories, to men like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Sam Bass, to fill the space that real freedom had left behind. The first printed stories of Sam Bass appeared in dime novels, cheap little books sold for 10 cents apiece. The cover showed Sam with a broad hat, a shining pistol, and a confident smile. In those tales, he was no longer an outlaw. He was a hero, fighting against greedy bankers, cruel sheriffs, and railroad tycoons. The writers took a real man and turned him into a legend that fit America's imagination. Readers loved it. They didn't care that the real Sam Bass had robbed for survival, not justice. They just wanted a man who stood up to power and smiled doing it. By the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood took the legend even further. The Wild West was booming on the big screen. Every studio wanted a new cowboy story, a new outlaw to capture audiences' hearts. In 1949, Universal Pictures released The Texas Badman, loosely inspired by Bass's exploits. And the following year came a film that sealed his cinematic fame, The Great Train Robbery, 1950, not the classic silent film, but a Western retelling featuring Howard Duff as Sam Bass. This version of Sam was handsome, misunderstood, and romantic. A man caught between love and the law. He wasn't a criminal. He was a symbol of freedom, courage, and rebellion. Hollywood polished away the dust and blood, leaving behind a clean, shining legend. But even as the movies glamorized him, small towns in Texas kept the truth alive. In Round Rock, locals preserved the sites tied to Bass's final days. The old cemetery, the streets where the shootout happened, and even the saloon where he was last seen alive. In Denton, the place he once called home, people told stories passed down through generations. Every tale added something new, a detail, a rumor, a twist. And over time, fact and fiction melted together until no one could tell them apart. That's how legends are born, not from truth, but from emotion. By the late 20th century, Sam Bass had become a fixture of Western folklore. His name appeared in songs, books, radio shows, and even local festivals. The Sam Bass Day Festival in Round Rock celebrated his story every summer, not as a criminal's tale, but as a piece of Texas history. Musicians like Tex Ritter, Burl Ives, and Johnny Cash recorded versions of The Ballad of Sam Bass. Each voice gave the song new life, deep, rich, and filled with longing. To the people who listened, Sam wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol of the West itself, bold, restless, untamed, and tragically human. But not everyone agreed with the glorification. Some historians argued that turning criminals into folk heroes blurred moral lines. They warned that romanticizing men like Bass ignored the real cost, the fear, the blood, and the lawmen who died doing their duty. Still, the stories kept spreading. Because people didn't see Sam Bass as evil. They saw him as human. He was the dreamer who went too far, the gambler who bet everything on freedom and lost, and in that, he became something universal, even today. More than 145 years after his death, Sam Bass rides on. You can find his name in Texas history books, his story in museum displays, his face on old movie posters and folk song records. He's part of the DNA of the American West, the wild, the fearless, and the flawed. The outlaw who smiled at death still lives on in every story told around a campfire. Every guitar strum that starts with Sam Bass was born in Indiana, and every time the song plays somewhere out there, another listener leans in, not for the facts, but for the feeling of freedom. Long before the songs and stories, before the gunfights and gold coins, there was just Sam Bass, a boy from Indiana with a restless heart. He wasn't born with a gun in his hand or crime in his blood. He was born with a dream, a simple one, to make something of himself, to find a place where he belonged. But the world he grew up in didn't give much to boys like Sam, and maybe that's why his story feels so human. Because deep down, every person who's ever felt trapped understands what it means to want more. In his early years, before the outlaw fame, Sam was known for his easy laugh and gentle manners. Neighbors remembered him as polite, hardworking, and good with horses. He had a way of making people trust him, not through fear but through warmth. He was quick to help a stranger and quicker to make a friend. That charm never left him. Even later, when he was a wanted man, people said he could walk into a saloon, smile once, and every head would turn. But behind that smile, there was something else, something quiet and unsettled. After his parents died, Sam's life became a road without a map. He worked hard but never stayed long in one place. He moved from job to job, ranch to ranch, chasing a kind of peace he never found. The open plains gave him freedom, but they also gave him loneliness. The long rides, the silent nights, they left him too much time to think. Maybe that's why gambling drew him in. At the card table, he could control his own fate, at least for a while. He could win, lose, or walk away, all by his own choice. That thrill, that sense of deciding his own destiny, was something life had rarely allowed him. When people called him the gentleman outlaw, it wasn't just about manners. It was about how he carried himself. Sam wasn't a bully or a killer. He didn't rob for cruelty or bloodlust. He robbed for freedom, for chance, for the idea that maybe, just maybe, he could beat the system that had beaten him. It doesn't make him innocent, but it makes him human. He loved to laugh. Even in the stories told by the men who hunted him, Sam was remembered as someone who found humor in the darkest times. One ranger wrote years later, "Bass smiled more than any man I ever chased. He joked with his men, teased his friends, and kept the mood light even when the law was closing in." That lightness wasn't carelessness, it was courage. For Sam, laughter wasn't escape, it was defiance. His way of saying, "You can take my life, but you can't take my spirit." And yet, for all his charm, there was always a shadow behind him, a sense that he knew his story wouldn't end well. Friends said he often talked about dying young. He'd say it with a grin, but there was truth behind the joke. Maybe he understood something others didn't, that some lives burn fast and bright, and that brightness always comes with a cost. There are letters and accounts from people who claim to have known him. One woman wrote that Sam once told her, "I ain't looking for trouble, ma'am. Trouble just seems to ride my trail." Another man who worked with him on a cattle drive remembered Sam as the best rider I ever saw and the loneliest man on the range. He was surrounded by people, yet somehow always alone. The gang followed him not just for his leadership, but because they believed in the feeling he gave them, that life could be lived on your own terms. But the truth was, Sam himself never found that freedom. Every robbery, every chase, every card game, it was all part of a search for belonging, for meaning, for something beyond survival. And maybe that's what makes his story timeless, because in the end, Sam Bass wasn't running from the law. He was running from emptiness, from a world that never gave him a fair hand. When the Texas Rangers finally caught up to him in Round Rock and he lay dying under a tree, the mask fell away. There was no gold, no glory, no crowd, just a young man bleeding into the dirt, whispering his last words. "I never meant to hurt anybody." Those weren't the words of a hero or a villain. They were the words of a man who had made too many wrong turns, but still carried a piece of goodness in his heart. Even the Rangers who found him later said there was something peaceful about his face, like a man who had finally stopped running. That's why Sam Bass still lingers in the American imagination. Not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. He was brave but reckless, gentle but wild, smart but impulsive, a dreamer who didn't know when to stop chasing dreams. He reminds people that freedom always has a price, and that sometimes the pursuit of it is both beautiful and tragic. When you strip away the legend, the songs, the movies, the myths, what's left is a young man who wanted a life that felt like his own. And though he never found it, his story reminds us all of something we forget too easily, that even outlaws are human, that every legend once had a heartbeat, and that sometimes the people we call bad are just the ones who wanted too much to be free. Nearly a century and a half has passed since Sam Bass rode his last trail. The Texas sun still burns over Round Rock, the trains still run across the plains, and the old songs still echo from dusty guitars. But somehow, against time, against history, against the silence of the grave, Sam Bass is still here, not in body, but in spirit. Every generation rediscovers him. A child hears the Ballad of Sam Bass for the first time. A traveler passes his grave in Round Rock and stops to read the name carved in stone. A filmmaker or songwriter looks into his story and finds something they recognize, something alive, and they all feel the same quiet pull, the tug of a man who refused to live small. In a world that grows more complicated every day, Sam's story remains simple: freedom. That's the word that has kept his name alive. Not money, not fame, not violence. Freedom, the same thing he chased across the Texas plains, the same thing he risked everything for. It's what makes his story timeless, because freedom, no matter the century, is what every human heart longs for. To some, Sam Bass is a cautionary tale, a reminder that defiance has a cost, that living by your own rules can lead to an early grave. But to others, he's a symbol of courage, a man who dared to live life on his own terms when the world demanded obedience. He stood for something deeper than rebellion. He stood for the belief that even an ordinary man could write his own story, and though his story ended in blood, it was still his. Across Texas, his name remains etched into the landscape. There's Sam Bass Road in Denton County, a Sam Bass theater that tells his story on stage. Each summer, Round Rock hosts the Sam Bass Festival, complete with music, parades, and reenactments of that final fateful day. Children laugh and cheer as cowboys ride through the streets, never realizing that the man they're celebrating once walked those same streets, bleeding and dying beneath the same sky. It's strange, maybe even ironic, how a life that ended in violence could inspire joy, art, and music for over a century. But that's what legends do. They outgrow their endings. Historians still debate the facts, how much gold he really took, whether he fired first in Round Rock, and what kind of man he truly was. But none of those details are what people remember. They remember the smile. They remember the courage. They remember the outlaw who died young, unbroken, and unafraid, because in the end, it wasn't what Sam Bass did that made him a legend. It was what he represented. Sam's story reminds us that life is not about perfection. It's about choice. Every man and woman stands at a crossroads between comfort and courage, safety and risk, obedience and freedom. Sam chose freedom, even when it led him down a dark road, and that's what makes his story echo. It's the sound of a heartbeat that refuses to fade, the whisper of the Wild West that still calls to the restless souls among us. If you visit Round Rock Cemetery today, you'll find his grave shaded by tall trees. The stone is simple, weathered by time, worn by rain and sun. Visitors still leave coins, cards, flowers, and bottles of whiskey. Some come to honor him. Others come just to see the legend for themselves. But no matter who they are, one thing always happens. They stand there in silence. Because when you look at that name, Sam Bass, carved into the stone, you can feel something deeper than words. It's not about crime. It's not about justice. It's about the brief, burning beauty of a life lived without fear. Maybe that's why the story still matters. Because deep down, we all have a bit of Sam Bass in us, a part that wants to ride away from the rules, from expectations, from the weight of what the world says we should be. We might not rob trains or dodge bullets, but we all chase freedom in our own way, in art, in love, in the simple act of being ourselves. And that's what Sam Bass represents, not the outlaw, but the outsider. The dreamer who wouldn't let the world tame him. Every era has its rebels, every time has its wild spirits, but few live on the way Sam did, through stories told by strangers, through songs sung by those who never met him. He was a man who never wore a crown, never held power, never commanded armies. He just lived fast, laughed often, and followed his own compass, even when it pointed toward the end. And that, perhaps, is the greatest rebellion of all. So the next time you hear the Ballad of Sam Bass, don't just hear a tune from the past. Hear the echo of freedom, the cry of a man who dared to be more than what life allowed. A man who chased the horizon until it swallowed him whole, because legends don't die. They ride on, through time, through stories, through the hearts of those who still believe that courage, even when it fails, is worth everything. Sam Bass, born in Indiana, died in Texas, lived forever in legend. The outlaw who smiled at death and taught the world what it means to live free,